Okay, we got a minute here. Early, yes, this is. No, I don't think so. I heard that too. See a lot of contracts here, though. Let's see if we got- Are we ready? Just let me know when you're ready to go. We'd like to welcome you to the Provo Municipal Council meeting. It is 5:31. We are convened in the City Center Municipal Council chambers on December 11th, 2018. This meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, Provo City Council, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. The council requests that citizens help maintain the decorum of the meeting by turning off electronic devices, being respectful to council and others, and refraining from applauding during the proceedings of this meeting. We will begin with the roll call. Cliff, will you start us?
Cliff Strachan.
Brian Jones.
Dave Sewell.
George Stewart.
Kay Van Buren.
Gary Winterton.
David Harding.
George Handley.
Dave Connect.
Mayor Kafusi, and Wayne is excused. I sent him home. He's really sick.
Thank
I'm
you
sure
for
he's
doing
watching
that.
from home.
Hi, Wayne. We will begin with an opening prayer from Martha Windsor and our Pledge of Allegiance from Catherine Allen. Thank you.
Dear Heavenly Father, we're grateful as we come before Thee this evening. We're grateful for our dear mayor and our city council and all who serve with them. We're grateful for the opportunity to come before them to voice the things that we appreciate and sometimes the things we have concerns about. We're grateful for all that they do to help Provo City be the very best city that it is today. We're grateful for the many ways that we can help also, and we say this humbly and thankfully in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.
Would the audience please rise? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Our first item of business is a presentation of the Provo City Audit Report and Comprehensive Annual Financial Report for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2018. And John Borgett will introduce this.
Chair Winston, members of the Municipal Council, and citizens of Provo, I want to introduce the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2018. This time I'd like to give a special thanks to the department heads, employees, and particularly the employees of the Finance Division. There's a lot of effort and work that goes into the preparation of our, what we refer to as our CAFR, and like to give special thanks and have them stand. Dustin Graybaugh, Dan Follett, Kelsey Zarbach, and Anissa Orwin. So thank them for their efforts and everything they do. This time I'd like to talk a little bit about a significant part of our audit that I wanted to mention is our fund balance. And we put up on the board what the fund balance for the general fund has been for the last 8 years. And one of the ways that we show it that kind of really helps us understand the significance of the fund balance, and the state has a limit that they like the cities our size to maintain, or a maximum of 25%. And you can see if you go back to 2011, it was 19, and it's trended up to where this year we're at almost 24%. And so we're just about 1% short of our maximum allowed by the state. And I would just say that in my mind, this is probably one of the best report cards for the general fund as far as what's referred to a lot of times as our rainy day fund, or our fund balance that gives us the ability to be prepared if we have some difficult times ahead, or if there's things that are big needs that we need to be able to have the ability to use fund balance to accomplish those. I was here back in the Great Recession, and fund balance is important, and I would applaud the council and administration for their management and for their commitment to build this balance. And so I just want to mention that that's an important part of our report. I'd like to now talk just a little bit about our report and kind of go through some outlying areas. We did submit to the council an updated CAFR. There was one slight change that went into the CAFR that we found this morning, and to be honest with you, historically we've provided the CAFR to the council on the day that it's presented, but we wanted to get it to the council a week early so that you had a chance to look at it and review it. We've always been nervous that we might find a little error. Well, we found that little error. It was a $5,000 error on the statement of net assets. It really doesn't impact the overall statement, but the version that we submitted to the council this afternoon includes that, so we just want to be transparent and let you know that. I want to talk a little bit about the introductory section, and included in the introductory section is a letter of transmittal, and if you go to page 7, I want to just cover a couple things in here that I think are real important. Starts off and says, state law and local ordinance requires that all general purpose local governments publish within 6 months of the close of each fiscal year, a complete set of financial statements presented in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles. And that's what this report is. This is our report. We prepare the report, and the auditors come in and review it and audit it. I just mentioned this report consists of management's representations concerning the finances of the city of Provo. Management assumes full responsibility for the completeness and reliability of the information presented in this report. Hanson, Bradshaw, Melrose, and Erickson, a firm of licensed certified public accountants selected by the Municipal Council, has audited the cities of Provo's financial statements. The goal of the independent audit is to provide reasonable assurance that the financial statements of the City of Provo for the fiscal year ended June 30th represent accurate portrayal of the city's financial position in all material respects. And I would just mention that for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2018, they found that they were presented fairly in conformance with generally accepted accounting principles. And Just mention that over a couple pages in, we talked briefly about the economic condition, and I would just mention that the national and local economy continues to be strong, and we continue to see a very low unemployment rate for Provo and Orem. It was 2.8% average for the year. Also, our sales tax revenue, which is a real good indication of the overall economy and the local economy as well as the national economy, we were up 1.1 million over budget, over the prior year, and roughly 6%, 5.9% over the prior year. A couple of major initiatives that we talk about, and there's a number of them. We can go through the different departments and talk about them and where they're at. Couple things that happened. Number one, as you're aware, we got 2 large water tanks that were put into service, one on Columbia Lane, the other one in Slate Canyon. Talk about the significant progress of the Duncan Aviation project at the airport and how it's nearing completion in Q2 of 2019. Talk a little about Stadium Avenue, which was a significant project that was completed during the year. Talk a little bit about the Triple Play program that was introduced by Parks and Recreation and how it's featuring both the Peaks Ice Arena and the East Bay Golf Course, and them along with the rec center is providing some synergy and real positives. I'd also mention that on awards and acknowledgments, we submit our report to the Government Financial Officers Association, known as GFOA. They go through and review it and critique it and provide us feedback on things that we're doing well and areas where we can use improvement. And then if it meets their standards, they have the opportunity to give us an award of excellence. And our report for the previous year, which ended June 30th, 2017, we did receive the award. And this report will be submitted, and we'll find out later in the year if we receive the award in the current year as well, and we're confident that we will. We've had it for over 20 years, and we feel like as a result of that review, we've been able to add more and more value to the report each year. This time, I'd like to turn the time over to Ed Erickson, who's the partner over the audit. We also have Jeff Miles, who's the audit manager, and both of them do a very professional job, and we appreciate the work that they do. And so we'll turn the time over to Ed, and then after Ed's done, if you have any questions from him or me, I'll be happy to come back and answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bourget. Appreciate the opportunity to meet with you, Mayor and Council, and briefly discuss the audit report, which was referenced that you've been able to have for a few days. I'd like to just hit a few highlights in the document. It's 100+ pages, but I'll just touch on a few things, and then as John indicated, I'd be happy to answer any questions any of you may have. He'd indicated that our opinion was a clean opinion on the financial statements, so they are prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. And that opinion is found on pages 17 and 18. On the bottom of page 17 is where we express our opinion that these statements are in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. There's the next section behind the audit opinion is management's discussion and analysis, several pages that gives highlights about the city's financial position and operations. One interesting or unusual or unique thing about the management's discussion and analysis section, it's the only section really in the document that compares current year with prior year. And so in this section, we're able to look at trends that are taking place in the city. Is the city improving and strengthening financially, or is it deteriorating? And I would say that the city's financial position did strengthen during the past year. I would look at page 21 in this management's discussion analysis. There's a very summarized financial position of the city comparing June 30, 2018 to 2017. As you look at that, you'll notice that the total assets of the city grew from almost 788 million to 819 million. Again, citywide, combining both governmental activities and business type activities. Whereas the city's liabilities actually decreased slightly from 184 million to about 183 million. And as a result of that, the city's net position, or the city's equity or fund balance, increased in total from 602 million to 628 million, about $25.5 million increase, the net position. Now, we'll talk, now the next page talks, page 22 shows a very summarized income statement or changes in net position for the year. And again, listing it by governmental activities and business type activities and comparing in total to 2017. You'll notice that the revenues went from 196 million last year to about 216 million this year, an increase of 20 million in revenues, whereas our expenses went up a total of about 13 million, from 177 million to 190 million. As a result, our change in net position, or increase in net position, was 19 million in 2017, increased to 25.7 million this year. Now, I will say some of the increase in net position, about 6 million of that is attributable to the contribution of assets to the merging of the ice sheet authority, the dissolving of the ice sheet authority, and being taken control of, and being the Provo City becoming responsible for the ice sheet authority. Part of that was those assets. Before, we used to show the ice sheet authority as a joint venture, and the city, Provo City, had a half of it, and the county had a half of it. So we showed our interest in the one half, and now we're showing the entire 100% of the ice sheet authority. And it shows as a separate proprietary enterprise type fund, the ice sheet authority. And that contribution of assets from the county was about 6 million of that increase. So take that out, our increase is actually fairly similar both years, about 19 million each year. Another change in presentation I'd like to point out is during this year, governments were required to adopt a GASB statement. It was GASB number 75, which required governments to pick up their entire obligation for, we call it OPEB, or other post-employment benefits. In other words, benefits that you're providing to retired city employees, for example, until they reach Medicare age. They continue on city's health insurance and other benefits. And so the governing body, GASB, decided that that entire liability should be reflected, and that reflection of that liability was done as of the beginning of the year as a prior period adjustment, or restating the beginning fund balances or net assets. And that's back in note 20 on page 81. You don't really have to turn to it, but I will just state that it was about 8.3 million additional liability, or reduction and a corresponding reduction in net position of governmental activities, and about 1.9 million reduction of business type activities net assets. So it was a total of about 10.2 million reduction of your net position to implement this statement. The other thing I mentioned, again, the ice sheet authority, those are the two biggest changes that took place during this year as far as from a city financial reporting, two biggest changes. With that brief overview, I would like to just see if there are any members of the council or mayor that have any questions regarding this portion of the document. And if not, appreciate that. I'll turn the time over to Jeff Miles. Again, he was the audit manager for the audit. He will discuss some of our other reports, including the single audit report. Before I conclude, I would just again want to express my appreciation not only to you and for your your management and governance of the city, but also to the finance staff for the excellent job that they do. They really are good to work with. They are very professional in how they approach their responsibilities for financial management of the city. But thank you. I'll turn it to Jeff.
Thanks, Ed. There should be a separate report packet that includes the single audit and compliance. With that, every audit we're required to gain an understanding of the city's internal controls and walk through different controls with the finance department and issue a report on those controls. And if you turn to page 2 of that report, we did not identify any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses in the city's internal controls. And in fact, we feel like the city's day-to-day operations are very well handled when it comes to handling of cash, accounts receivable, accounts payable, and maintaining accounting records that are auditable and able to be presented to the city council. So we did not identify any control weaknesses in the city's financial reporting. The next report on page 3 is what's referred to as a single audit. Since the city receives more than $750,000 in federal grants, they are subject to an additional audit by us where we review major programs where the city's receiving federal funds. And the 2 major programs that we audited this year, both related to airport improvements. There was a public works grant to help with infrastructure, and then Wells airport improvement grant related to the Duncan aviation and improvements that are being done at the airport. And as part of the single audit, we did not identify any non-compliance with the requirements of the federal grants that the city received during 2018. And then the final report is the state auditor's office requires us to look at a variety of state compliance issues during the course of the audit. If you turn to page 10, you'll see that during this year we audited budgetary compliance, fund balance, the justice courts, Utah retirement systems, taxes, Open to Public Meetings Act, impact fees, treasurer's bond, cash management, fund transfers, and tax levy revenue recognition. And we identified 1 instance of noncompliance in the city. If you turn to page 13, you'll see our finding there. State law requires that meeting minutes, once they're approved by city council, be posted to the public notice website within 3 days. And we noticed a couple of instances during the year where those minutes were not posted to that website in that time constraint. So we met with management, and we see management's response here of some controls are going to put in place to ensure that those minutes are posted in a timely manner after city council has approved them. And so overall, we feel like the city has good controls in place to maintain compliance with both state requirements and federal requirements. Any questions from council?
One question, I go back to that list of the things that you audited. These were not departments. You don't audit department heads, departments.
No, these are citywide. During 2017, we did sit down and meet with every department head and go through kind of controls within departments when it comes to procurement and especially credit cards. That was kind of a hot button issue in 2017. It's kind of unusual to meet with every department head in one given year, but we decided to do that in 2017. This year, we only met with a couple department heads, and we kind of rotate who we're going to meet with on a city basis. But this is citywide compliance issues that the state has us look at. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
I'd like to just mention 2 things that I failed to mention before. First of all, for our citizens of Provo, we will be publishing this report on our website. We'll do that tomorrow morning, and so if anybody wanted to pull up and look at the report, it'll be under finance, and then under the finance there's financial reports, and then the comprehensive annual reports, and it'll have 2018 there, and so I'll make you aware of that. One other thing, our CAFR, as mentioned, is a pretty large document. Sometimes it can be a little difficult for the lay person to read it and understand it, and so we will be coming back in January to do a similar presentation for what we call our popular annual financial report. That report has more graphs and tables and focuses a little bit more on just a high-level understanding of the finances, and so that can be helpful as well, in addition to our CAFR for individuals to read. And so we'll come back in January and share that with the council and have that available as well. So any other questions for me?
Not a question, but a comment. I just want to thank the Finance Division and really city staff, city employees across the city who handle these financial matters. This is really a stellar report, and we're just kind of getting used to it because you perform so admirably year after year after year. I just want to thank you on behalf of the citizens of Provo, and also thank you for making our job on the council easier when things are so clean and so well managed. It really is a great service to the citizens of Provo. Thank you.
Thank you.
And one other thing that I've recognized is that we improve on it every year, and I am grateful for that. It means that we're not sitting down. We're looking to the future and always trying to be better. Thank you for that.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate your support.
Okay. This is not an item to be voted on. They're just presenting it to the council, and we appreciate you doing that today. We'll turn the time over to Mayor Kaufusi.
Hello, council. Usually the mayor doesn't do this, but I'm privileged tonight to introduce our Provology graduates. They're such a fun group. I graduated from Provology, and when I came and spoke to this group, I thought, what a fun group to have been in. I think they had a great time. I hope they did. Just a lot of quality people that are highly engaged in the community because you give up about 4 hours a week for this class, and you learn a lot, you attend a lot, you meet all the directors in different departments, you do tours, you come away with a real deep understanding of the city and the way it works and functions. And then I always encourage everyone, now that you've graduated from this, now you got to go graduate from the Police Citizens Academy. That's the next one to give up your 4 hours a week for the next 8 weeks. But we would love to give you a certificate. It's their last night, and we're providing a nice dinner upstairs for them. And Romy is who actually took the class, but she got a job in Salt Lake City, so we were so thrilled. And she said, Mayor, I'll stay back if you want me to. And I said, are you kidding? Go do your new job. We got you. So Emma will help me from my office, and she'll also help get everyone graduated and upstairs for the dinner. So let's go ahead and we'll say their names. And if you're here, come on up, and Emma has a certificate for you. So the first name is Ashley Jensen. And I don't know if oh, there's Ashley. I didn't see her come in. So... And then after Ashley is Brad Wood.
Ashley's my neighbor. Congratulations, Ashley.
Frame that and put that up. Thank you, Brad. And Eric Ludwig. So great. Aaron Young. And look at the diversity of ages. I love it. James Stewart. James here. Okay, Jason Bodley. Catherine Allen. Thank you. Martha Windsor. Neil Harrington. Thanks, Martha. So good. Thanks, Neil. Paul Hughes. Ralim Broth. And Ron. Oh, you guys were a couple. That is so awesome. What a great free date on the city. Sarah Acey. Thanks, Sarah. Sharon Memmott. I don't think I saw Sharon come in. Tanya Stanley. Tricia Nilsson. And Wendy Wise. Wendy here? Oh, right there. Here you are. Perfect. Congratulations to all our graduates, and thank you for taking the time to care about your city you live in and learning about it.
Thank you, Mayor and Emma. We will now turn to our public comment portion of this period of the council meeting. And Brian, would you introduce this for us?
I'd be happy to, Mr. Chair. As indicated on the screen, a required public hearing will be held for certain agenda items prior to council action. After each such item has been presented, time to comment will be provided for all those who wish to speak. For items that do not require a public hearing, public comment will still be taken following presentation of the item, but will be limited to 10 minutes. However, there will be no presentation or public comment on items on the consent agenda unless such items are removed from the consent agenda. This slide here shows the consent agenda as opposed to the action agenda on the next slide, which differentiates between those where public hearing and public comment will be allowed. At this time, 15 minutes have been set aside for an open public comment period, which is intended to allow comment on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Persons who speak during this time to an item that is on the agenda will not normally be afforded a second opportunity to speak during the comment period specific to that item. During any public comment period, each speaker will generally be limited to 2 minutes. Additional time may be given to individuals specifically invited to speak, such as applicants, neighborhood chairs, or others that may be representing additional persons. Please begin your comments by stating your name and city of residence. Due to noticing requirements, no formal action will be taken in this meeting on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Those with comments are invited to approach the podium.
Pam Jones. I'm a vice chair of Edgemont neighborhood. I just came from a school district meeting where they are proposing yet another bond. It seems Timpview High School is either falling apart or sliding down the hill on the clay substrate. There are 3 other schools that are old and need to be replaced. And I asked, well, yeah, you've got all these needs, but what about the taxpayer? The state wants more money. I don't know whether they're going to raise the gas tax or sales tax or whatever, but they always want money. The county wants money. I've been to 3 meetings in the past week with the county commission, and they need raises for county employees, COLA, cost of living allowances, employee banquets, and so on. It looks like 2 of the 3 commissioners are going to vote to raise not only property tax, but sales tax. And one of the most disconcerting things to me was that they said that they have been meeting with mayors and city council members all over the valley and have already gotten somewhat of a commitment that they will support the tax hikes. It's been decades since I voted for a tax hike. I did support the Provo bond. You owe me one, folks. But I really don't want to pay any more. I can't afford it. I'm on a fixed income. And there are a lot of people in Provo and the county who can't either. So I hope you will continue to spend our money wisely. and not support other tax hikes.
My name's Robin Roberts, business owner, resident here of Provo, Southeast Provo. My concern is the need of having businesses coming to Provo. We have so many empty buildings out there. I wrote an email, I think last night to Dave concerning this. Whatever the changes need to be done or whatever we need to do, we need to really push that. The business owners that are here are taking the brunt of these taxes, these bond taxes and everything. We're taking the brunt of this, and we can't take it all. We really do need more businesses here, building homes and apartments. We have to have a number of businesses that come in, or else it's going to be really hard for the businesses that are here to sustain the bonds and the tax increases that continue to come. So I don't know what the answer is. I'm just saying that whatever we need to do to take a look at that and make some changes that are necessary to get the businesses to come back. You look at Spanish Fork and Orem over the years, and Springville. There's some great expansion that's going on, but only here and there in Provo. So just asking that we need to make that, whatever needs to be done, we need to make some changes there. So thank you. Appreciate the work that you do. You do a great work, and it's not easy, and all the things that you have to do and the decisions you have to make. But so we appreciate what you do. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to comment at this time? Okay, seeing no one coming forward, we will close the public comment portion of this meeting and move to the consent agenda. Are there any council members which would like to remove any of the 4 items on the consent agenda to the regular agenda? Seeing none, these are implied motions then, and we will ask for a vote on all 4 items. Those in favor? All 4 of those items pass unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item number 7, a resolution appointing individuals to various boards and commissions. Mayor Kafusi.
I know, I just feel I never speak in these meetings because it's not my meeting, it's the council, and they do such a wonderful job. So I feel like, wow, this is enough speaking to last me for the next year. So we just recently reappointed our boards and commissions, and it's a wonderful process. And what it does is it engages anyone in the community that has a desire to contribute to our city or be on a deciding board that gives recommendations to the council and myself about what direction they would like to see the city go in various aspects, like the airport board, the library board, the arts council board, the rec board. We have a lot of boards because that's how Provo works. We engage our citizens, and we've had a couple changes, and I have reached out to some people to fill the seats, and they are gracious enough to agree to take these new positions on our board. In our Arts Council, we have Jane Wise. I don't know if you're here, stand up. Oh, there's Jane. Thank you, Jane. She will be reappointed to another 3-year term, so the word reappointed, she's put in some good hours, so thank you. Energy Board, Mary Rasband, and I didn't see Mary walk in, but she will also be reappointed. She's a great asset to that board. Our Housing Authority, we got to put 2 people on, which is great. Lynette Hemsath, she's new, and we're excited to have her. She graduated from UVU and is a resident of Provo, and will work with us in our Housing Authority. And on the City Council, we get to assign one as well for that Housing Authority Board, and we have asked George Henley, and he's agreed. So thank you. Thanks to everybody. And I believe this calls for action.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor. And you can speak again next year, which is the next meeting. So, is there any discussion by the council at this point on any of these? Thank you, Dave. This item is open for public comment. If anyone wishes to comment or speak, please come forward. Okay, seeing none, we do have an implied motion, and are there any, we will call for a vote at this time. Those in favor of these appointments? Those appointments are confirmed unanimously. Mr. Harding.
I just want to thank the new board members, the returning board members. We have a number of boards and commissions across the city, and I really think that much of the quality of life here in Provo, much of how well the city runs, a lot of that is attributable to the volunteers who serve on these boards and commissions and really help us set the right direction for the city. And so just thank you for your service.
Thank you. We will now move on to item number 8, a resolution setting the parameters of the Provo Police, Fire, and City Facilities Bond. Dan Follett will give us this presentation.
Thank you, Council Chair Winterton and Municipal Council. We appreciate the opportunity we have to review this parameters resolution with the council tonight. Just a little bit of background. In November, Provo voters approved the Provo Police, Fire, and City Facilities bonds. And so now we're in the process of issuing those bonds. And part of that process is requesting that the City Council consider approving a resolution regarding, it's called a parameters resolution, and it does just that. It sets the parameters for the issuance of those bonds. The parameters that it would set is $69 million in principal, a repayment term of not to exceed 20 years, an interest rate not to exceed 5.5%, and be sold at a discount not to exceed 2%. It also requires a public notice, which starts a 30-day contest period, where any individuals that have any concern about the bond issuance process would be able to raise their concerns and voice those concerns. I would mention that the bonds will ultimately be sold on a competitive bid basis on January 22nd. That happens to be the same day as the municipal council meeting. The results of that sale will be presented to the council that evening for their approval, and nothing will be final with respect to the sale of those bonds until the council has approved them on January 22nd. There's a number, we have the resolution, I believe, in your packet there. There's also an exhibit to that resolution, which is the public notice, which will be posted next Monday and begin that 30-day contest period. And you also, I believe, have a copy of the final bond resolution that we will return with on January 22nd. It has blanks in it now. Those blanks, again, will be filled in once we complete the sale earlier in the day on the 22nd, and that sale will again be contingent upon council approval. Are there any questions?
We had a discussion a little bit earlier on this, and I think that you've answered all of our questions. This item is open for public comment. Stay close, Dan, just in case somebody does bring up something. We will open this item up for public comment now. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council for any further discussion. Okay, we have an implied motion for this. Now, do we need to do a motion to set the parameters? Is that a motion required thing?
Yes, my understanding is we need to approve this resolution. We would ask for the council to formally approve the resolution so that we can have it recorded as such.
Okay, thank you. We do have an implied motion for this resolution. And so I will call for a vote if there are no changes to that at this time. Okay, those in favor? That passes unanimously. Thank you. We will move on to item number 9, an ordinance amendment amending the amending the zone map classification of approximately 6.21 acres of real property generally located. Oh, I missed a page. I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Dave. An ordinance amending Provo City Code to modify and enact impact fees for water, wastewater, stormwater, power, parks and recreation, roadway facilities, and public safety, and to modify provisions regarding these impact fees. This will be presented by John Borgett. If you have any, no, maybe we don't. I don't know if you have anything. Your name is on here, John, but I think you presented in our work meeting, and if you have any information for us. Sorry to put you on the spot there.
All right. We had an at-length discussion with council in our work session this afternoon, talking specifically about the impact fee study. I would just mention that we use Zions Public Finance as the consulting company that we did for this in-depth study. We've actually been looking at this study for over a year, about 15 months. It's included dealing with a number of consultants that specialize in the different areas. We had a committee that we've met approximately on a monthly basis to kind of look at each fee and do kind of an in-depth analysis. And there's been a lot of good discussion and help. Included on that committee were a couple members of the Municipal Council, as well as staff. And then we had some from the Home Builders Association and other individuals, so that we really tried to make sure that we were going through an open and a complete process. We also had an open house that was well attended about a little over a month ago at the rec center, and we fielded questions there and kind of went through and had some good at-length discussions. We are recommending a fairly substantial increase. But we go back, I believe, to 2004, since the last time impact fees were increased. And as you look at construction inflation on an annual basis, the increases that we're recommending are not too different than what construction inflation has been over that time frame. And so we are here to have a hearing to where individuals can come and provide feedback and have an open comment period, but I can answer any specific questions. But we did talk at length this afternoon in the work session.
Thank you, John. Are there any? Cliff?
I think it's important, Councilmember Harding brought this up earlier, in various discussions that have been happening on social media and other places, there is not everyone understands what an impact fee is about. An impact fee is meant to cover the impact of new development within the city, so that ratepayers aren't paying it. It's the cost of extending infrastructure, expanding infrastructure to meet the needs of a growing population, that's really the kind of the distinction. So everybody will pay rates to help fund the system, but to capture that part that's attributable to new growth, we assess impact fees.
Thank you. This item is open for public comment, so we will open it up at this time for anyone that would like to address this.
Good evening, Council, Mayor, and staff. John is correct. The Home Builders Association, my name's Deanna Hewish. I'm from Orem, Utah, and I represent the Utah Valley Home Builders Association. Sorry about that. The Home Builders Association was involved since October 2017. We came to every monthly meeting, and worked with Zions and went through some of the numbers. We actually had 2 of the impact fee facility plans reviewed by one of our attorneys, the sewer and the water. The water one, we still have some questions on it, and the reason why is because it's such a huge increase, and we understand that these haven't been revisited since the 2004 and changed. It stated in the paper, just for the public to know too, that in the Daily Herald, it stated that it was a 60% increase, which is not correct. The 2019 increase is 82%. But there's some bonds out there on, I believe, 5 of these impact fees. And so every year, those impact fees will go up to what the total impact fee is as the bond is paid down. When this all ends and all of those bonds are paid off, it will actually be about a 96% increase. And yes, impact fees came to us back in the 1990s from a state west of us that we don't want to duplicate too much, and in California, and it's a tax for that new person that's coming into to buy into the equity to the level of service of whatever that service is. If it's transportation in your roads, your sewer, whatever. And as you all know, and I know that you actually had a kind of a class to learn more about impact fees, because every city council usually has to get up to grade on what they are. We do appreciate the chance we had to be involved into it. We felt like we had some good input that helped clarify and sometimes even bring down what that impact fee was. And we do appreciate that. Our biggest concern is that, you know, the Provo, the last 2 people who spoke in the open, oh, my time is over.
You were on our committee, and I think it'd be good if you took a couple minutes, and please do.
That there was just some people who are talking about taxes and talking about economic development. The residential is what I represent, and that's what I've been watching, but the commercial, they pay a lot higher impact fee. And man, that can be very, very hard on economic development when they're looking at the city, and those impact fees are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we do appreciate your time that you spend on this. We understand that there are facilities that have to be improved and added to, and we understand that, and we do want to pay our way as new homeowners who become citizens and residents and users and pay those fees too. So thank you for your time.
And thank you for your time. You've spent many, many hours with this, and we appreciate that very much, Deanne. Thank you.
Hi, Mayor and Council. Good to see you. Matt Hansen, PEG Development. Some of you might recognize me. We've done a number of projects in town and hope to continue to, we're based here and enjoy working with Provo. We do have, some concerns with this. We understand it's part of development, and everybody's got to pay their fair share. We get that. I guess the one request that I have, and unless I'm misunderstanding, I would love to have an explanation. As it pertains to multifamily housing, we see that most of the fees have been commensurate with, a lighter burden than a single-family home. But it looks like water and sewer, they're treating a single-family home the same as a multifamily unit, which to us is not a fair part of the burden. If it's based on fixture units, which is a metric that was used in assessing these fees, a 1-bed or a studio apartment would be about 12 fixture units, where the equivalent residential unit, the ERU, for a single-family home is 26 units. And then for a 2-bedroom, we estimate would be about 18 units. So my request is that you carefully consider whether we're treating single-family and multifamily housing the same as far as water and sewer fees go. I've worked in other municipalities where they differentiated between those based on the fixture unit count of the actual project, which I think is the fair, equitable way to do that. So I don't know if that's something that this gentleman could speak to, but if not, if you would please consider that before passing this impact fee increase to make sure it's being fairly allocated. And I do, in general, I think we want to see Provo succeed, and we are a little bit concerned about the economic impact of these fee increases. I know in the previous meeting, it was mentioned that possibly these could be phased in, but that wouldn't work based on the amount of money that's needed to fund the entire, all the improvements that are planned. And so I don't know if there's another way to, I guess, ease the blow instead of all of it taking effect immediately. That's just something that in the development community, I think, would really be helpful for us. We have some projects that are really close to breaking ground here in Provo, in the downtown area, that may or may not be able to withstand the increase in the fees. So appreciate your time.
Good evening, Ben Davis, also with PEG Development, current resident of Sandy. I was born in Provo, though, a long time ago. So just wanted to make a quick comment about, just a general comment about housing affordability. Just kind of the basic economics of these proposed impact fees. The Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute demonstrates that there's a 40,000 unit gap based on between number of households between 2011 and 2017 and the number of housing units. So that's a significant gap. So from a multifamily perspective, just want us to be real cautious about what these impact fees could do, understanding that demand will continue to increase. And we feel that this could have a pretty significant impact on the number of units that can be built. Specifically, we have plans for 2 to 250 unit apartment project on the Freedom Block, and if you do the math on that, it's about it's a total cost. It's about a $1.2 million increase on that for a total of about $2.5 million total for impact fees. That's about 5 to 6% of the proposed project. So that's a significant cost. And so just want to make that statement about just make sure we're considering the housing affordability and how these impact fees could cause projects to not come to fruition, which exacerbates the housing affordability issue. Thanks.
Is there anyone else that would like to comment? Then we will bring it back to council and for any council discussion and potentially answer a question. I do have that question about, we did discuss both of those items today in our work meeting. John, would you care to address that?
There was some discussion in our work session this afternoon about the question with the MDUs compared to the single-family dwellings, and a couple of things that were mentioned, and those of you that were there, if you have any additional clarifications, you're welcome to. But what I heard and understood is that that in a number of situations, some of the larger MDUs that we're seeing in the city are quite comparable as far as the use and drain on the system to a single-family dwelling unit. But if there were large projects or developments that went in that had smaller, smaller units that pretty much were just like for one bachelor or just different sizes on a case-by-case basis, they could come back and present their case to the city, and the city could look at their analysis on the impacts related to their project, and there could be a different fee that would be agreed to based on those credits and those things based on that case. And so that's kind of what I heard and my understanding of this afternoon, but I really think that was the reasoning behind keeping the two the same initially in the ordinance. You got into that, Cliff, or is that?
I think so. If I might add, one of the things that council had directed to was to go back and look at the issue of whether or not to provide exemptions for affordable housing, and to report back on that sometime before this takes effect. The other thing to add is that the council extended the 90-day period for implementation to January 1st. So in effect, we've got just July 1st. So in effect, we have about 6+ months, 6.5 months to prepare for this.
I think one of the reasons that I would like to have suggested that July 1st is because of the large increase, and to give developers a chance to be aware of that, take it, do what they need to do. It is a large increase. We know that. Things have really gone up since 2004. And we do have a process in place now where we plan on looking at a couple of impact fees every other year, so that we will not have to deal with such large increases, that they will become more and more acceptable, I guess, because of the time frame that they'll be under.
The other thing I could add in Deanne's question about the impact fees that increased over time, the way that the impact fees work and calculate is that if there's debt associated with some of the projects that are included in the impact fee, there's actually a credit for the interest on that debt. And because over time the interest goes down and it'll eventually go away, then that credit is reduced as the interest goes down, and so that causes the fee to go up. So in essence, we wanted to make sure in the impact fee law wants to make sure that we're not paying for that the residents and the citizens aren't paying for twice, once through an impact fee and then also through interest, and so that's why it changes over time.
Dave.
I just wanted to share a couple thoughts on those questions. We did receive that answer that in larger studies, the impact of multifamily apartments and whatnot are fairly equivalent to single-family detached, though the person answering that question mentioned that there's no question that there are certain configurations, smaller one-bedroom studio type apartments that have a significantly less impact, and how those. Well, I just wanted to mention in Provo, it does seem that we have far more of our multifamily that are more of those one-bedroom and smaller apartments. We've talked about this in the past, and so. That's just something to be aware of. But we were assured that not just on water and sewer and not just multifamily developments, but anyone can come in and explain why their impacts are different than what the average that these fees are set at. And if you can make that argument, then the city will adjust the impact fee that is assessed. So that is, I'm glad that we have that avenue. But in Provo, since so many of our multifamily is different than what we've seen in some of the further outlying cities, that we might want to consider that. And then the other thing, we did talk about phasing a little bit. My suggestion or my thought was phasing it just between the March 11th earliest time that we could implement, and then phasing it in until July 1st, which was kind of the latest that we were talking about. And I don't know if that would help at all, because currently we are now considering that July 1st, and so I would imagine the developers would rather it all come in at once, July 1st, rather than phasing through that small window. But any feedback, I'd welcome to hear that feedback. Thank you.
Mr. Sewell.
So I've been thinking about phasing a little bit too. As I understand it, the last round of impact fees were implemented something like 12 to 14 years ago. I think this time around we have a couple of new types of fees, at least police and fire. And then last time around, my understanding is that they weren't implemented at 100% of cost. It was something less than that. And then we've had 12 or 14 years of rising costs in the meantime. So it's a pretty big jump. So I just wanted to throw out the possibility of doing this in 2 steps, with the first step being on July 1st, which would be about halfway from where we are now to where we eventually want to be, which I think is 100% cost recovery. And then a year later, take the second step. If any counselors are willing or interested in exploring that, I'd be willing to make that motion. If not, I won't.
Mr. Connect.
Okay, question, John. Sorry to make you get up. So if we had actually assessed 100% of the impact fees that we could have in 2004 or 5, off the cuff, do you have a rough number of what it would have been if it was 100% instead of the 70% or so that we charged?
As far as what the difference would have been, what the fees would have been now versus...
Well, no, back then, if we had gone for the full 100%, what would have been the total impact fee? And of course, that would be still today because it hasn't changed, but what would be the impact fee if we had gone 100%?
I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and check it, but I would guess, I think it's around $8,600 right now, and so probably...
10.5 or?
I would say probably in the probably high 9s, but I'd have to go check it and see.
I was just thinking if we charged 70 and then you added another 30% onto that, you might be over 10,000.
Yeah, I know we phased it like over, I think 4 years, and but I don't remember specifically if we ended up over the 4 years at exactly 80% or what it was. I'd need to go back and look at it.
Yeah. I guess the point I was trying to bring up is if we had charged the full amount, it would have been a significantly higher number.
Yeah.
And just for argument's sake, it could have been around 10,000. Mm-hmm. And so if we had charged 100% then, what we were looking at today, instead of going from 8-something to close to 15, it would have been more like 10 to 15. So percentage-wise, it would not be as big a jump.
That's true.
Yeah.
Maybe a related question, John, is if you have any sense of, had these fees been increased gradually according to cost of living, cost of construction, do you have a sense of how that would compare to what this particular proposal is?
Yeah, there was actually a look, I think, Cliff, I think we looked at those numbers, looking at construction inflation over that time frame, and it was estimated that would be pretty close to what we're recommending right now had we done it based on construction inflation each year from 2004 till now 2018.
That's what Susie Becker had said on that issue. Now that's assuming the same pool of projects and such, but that was her indication that if you just took inflation on the various curves, you'd be very close to where you're at today.
Was there any assessment of what the impact in the interim has been to the citizens in terms of rate paying with the sort of artificially depressed impact fees over that period of time?
No, I'm not aware of any analysis other than the fact that is what happened, during that time frame, because we were not covering for all of the growth. The ratepayers were paying the difference.
Okay.
Might I correct a misunderstanding? Earlier in the last council meeting, there was a discussion about how these rates had been at 75% or a lower phased-in rate, or early, and I think the presumption was that rate had stayed low all this time. Going back, we looked at and found out that it was the various impact fees were adopted under a 3-tiered structured phase-in process that gave between 32 and 44 months before the full implementation schedule occurred. So by January 1st, January of 2007, water impact fees were at the full rate. And by January of 2008, all other impact fees were at the full rate.
The full rate of the 75% or the full rate of 100%
Full
of
rate
what
of
was
my
recommended?
understanding is the full rate of the 100% that was established 14 years ago.
That's what I was wondering about too. I remembered 4, but it was actually 3 years. So on initially, they did 70, but then eventually they got to it.
Right. The ordinance was passed in March of 2005, and then it phased them in so that by 2007 and 2008, you were at the full impact fees.
The 100% of the recommended fees.
But we haven't been there, of course, we haven't updated them in 10 years, so, from that point. But the study, the actual cost structure study that was done 14 years ago in 2004 and adopted in March of 2005.
Not implemented fully until 2008, if I
7 and 8,
understand
yeah.
you correctly. Okay.
So there was some gap in those early years.
So there's a 4-year gap between the time they did the assessment and the time that it actually finally was implemented fully.
Right.
And the challenge is if we did something like that now, and we wanted to review impact fees every 4 or 5 years, which we're recommending. We're recommending doing like a impact one each year so that we keep it current. It makes it very difficult when you're doing a phased-in approach like that because you haven't even got to your full fee before you're actually looking at reviewing it again.
Right. Current city code requires a review of the impact fees no longer than every 5 years. So.
Starting.
So we have talked about adopting this tonight, and then going back and looking at a few questions, policy questions, and maybe making some changes before the implementation date. When we first talked about that, the motion that was on the table was to have these implemented on March 11th. We've now initially just tentatively decided that we want to hold off until the 1st of July. And I feel I can support passing it tonight with the idea that we may come back and make some changes. But the more we discuss, the more answers that we get, the more assumptions that were incorrect that have been corrected, like this 70 versus 100%, the more I feel I'd be more comfortable with continuing this, not passing it tonight, still have that July 1st implementation date, but resolving some of these questions, having a little bit more policy discussion, affordable housing, low-income housing, even the 3/4 to versus 1-inch meter question, and some additional questions have come from the community tonight. I'd feel more comfortable getting all of that resolved and passing it once, having everything we want, and still having that July 1st implementation date. But again, I can support if we decide to pass what's before us now and then come back and fix it, but I think I'd prefer the other way.
Mr. Stewart.
I understand the only issue that we're considering is affordable housing. I don't know why we would not pass it tonight, because we have a method of doing that, taking care of that issue between now and July 1st. We just gone so long with this, David. We need to give the development community and the city some assurity of what's going to happen. And we just keep putting it forward, and we don't have that. So I'm certainly not in favor of not passing it tonight. I think we've gone years without having adequate fees. I think we discussed this. It's been a year and some odd that we've been working on this, so I hopefully we would pass it tonight.
Mr. Harding.
Mr. Sewell brought up the question about phasing. It has been a very exhaustive process, and we are here a year into it. We did hear it 2 weeks ago, but it was not contemplated that we'd vote on it 2 weeks ago. So I don't feel like we've pushed it off. I think we set out a year ago, and we're now at this point in the process, and I don't feel like we've really pushed it off. This would push that off a little bit, but again, with the same implementation date contemplated. But I understand and respect that your position. I'd be interested to know if any other council members felt that these outstanding questions and possible policy questions like phasing or if we want to talk about them or the concerns that have been brought up tonight.
George.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm not interested in delaying the vote. And the reason I feel that way is that I'm concerned about the fact that we've sort of, I feel like, and maybe if I'm misunderstanding this, I'm happy to be corrected, but it seems to me that all of the concern has been in the direction of the developers, and I know why, and I'm not saying this to be anti-development, but I do have this concern that if we've waited this many years without taking any action on having our fees accurately reflect the costs of construction and on our infrastructure, and that cost has been borne by the citizens through rate paying, then I think we owe it to the citizens to act more immediately on this. I think they've been shortchanged. I know that developers are citizens as well, and I understand that, but I think the vast majority of the ratepayers in the city have been incurring a cost that is the result of that suppression of the impact fees. So I'm feeling a little more eager to get it going.
Dave?
So one of the big impacts is the rise with the water impact fee, and there's a fair amount in sewer also, and those, at least the sewer one, I believe, is where we can have some adjustment as we have developers come in and say that they have a small unit that has a small number of fixtures, and therefore they don't have the 26 that a single-family house would have, and they can make the case that their impact fee should be perhaps even half of what a single-family house should have. And that's what you would expect to see as you build higher density housing, that the infrastructure would be more efficient, there's fewer people living in each unit, and so I just want to make it clear that that opportunity is there, that they can come in and make the case, and as long as the numbers add up, they should be granted a lower impact fee than just a standard home.
Two comments. First of all, Dave Decker, Public Works Director. Can you in just a quick explanation, we've made the statement 2 or 3 times tonight that the city pays for the new development, and that's just not true. They pay for the impact on the old development the new development has. The new development's paid by developers. Is that right? They put the sewer lines in, they put the water lines in, they put the storm drain lines in, they put the roads in, they put the sidewalks in. Can you just give us a quick distinction between where that line is of what's the new development and what's the impact? Because if people are watching this, I don't want it to be said that we've been paying for that, and it's the impact on the existing, how it's going to impact the existing facilities. Does my question make any sense, Dave?
I think in general, when a question about impact fee is raised, what we're paying for, there's a distinction that that comes, and I've heard this from both legal and from development. There's a project improvement, and then there's a system improvement, and I think you have to distinguish. A project improvement is often internal to the development, so when they're putting in their sewer and their water in that subdivision or in that development proper, the impact fees are not changed or paying for any of the infrastructure inside the development. That's all, generally that's completely the developer's responsibility. But that sewer line that discharges into the larger system line that's adjacent to that development, that line is eligible for impact fees if the line has to be increased or another line has to be added to the system to take in the impact, the sewage that's discharged from those additional developments. So I think there's a distinction that you have to realize between, again, system improvements and project improvements.
And thank you. And I think over these last 15 months, we've had the studies done and the experts help us make that distinction. Exactly. And that's the whole process. And I think Home Builders has been there and challenged some things, and we've kind of arrived at a, maybe not an all agreeable number, but at least a fair number is the best we can do. So
it's one of the main components of the IFFP and the following studies is to identify system improvements and eligible system improvements and how much, what percentage of each project cost is eligible for impact fees. But they're not talking about individual sewer lines or water lines inside of a development.
Okay, thank you. Second comment I wanted to make is we've had some discussion, and we keep adding to the discussion that in our work meeting today, we said, if we pass this ordinance, we're concerned about affordable housing, there will be an opportunity to take that case by case. And now we're having discussion too that we're saying, okay, now if we're doing multifamily, we got case by case. I'm just a little nervous that we've opened this door up to, we pass an ordinance, but everybody can come in single family people can't, but maybe a single family development that has some special circumstances. And I don't know if that's going to be, who's going to lead that discussion? What parameters, what points do we have to say this qualifies or this doesn't qualify? But our discussion has been, let's pass this with those conditions. And I'm just a little nervous that we're opening that door up. I think if we pass an impact fee ordinance, it is what it is. And there may be a few, but I think we're just having a lot of discussion about being able to modify those impact fees along the way. And I'm not comfortable with that.
Oh, go ahead. So one of our philosophical approaches has been for people to pay for what they get, for what they use. And rather than just say everyone's going to pay this high level that's based on 26 fixture units, if you can show that you don't have that many, if you want to build a one-room, single-family house on a little tiny lot somewhere, not that I've seen that lately, but if you wanted to build it, you could come in and say, hey, I've got one kitchen, one bathroom, and I've only got so many fixtures, and I want this much of an impact fee, and I think we'd be obligated to be fair and only charge you for the impact that you're putting on the system. In my neighborhood by Slate Canyon, there is 26 acres of R110 property that is not being developed, and it's largely because of the cost of that development, of the supplying not the sewer in the ground, that's a given. All the stuff you have to put in the ground, the developer knows that cost, but the cost that is holding up the project is there's no water pressure. And the developer would have to put a water tank on the hill in order to have water pressure. And that's the cost of developing difficult pieces of property. If you want to go high enough on the hill and high enough that you're above our current infrastructure and our current water tanks, then you're going to have to pay that. The alternative is to say that, well, sure, we can build to any level in the mountain, and the citizens will just pay for the rest of it, for the water tank. And so right now we do have developments that, whether it be a pump station on the west side or a water tank on the east side, there are things that are external to the development that are very, very expensive and that have to be factored into the impact fees.
My one caveat to that is that they already have to be in the CIP. And so any developer that comes in and thinks that they're going to allow the city to put up a higher one, it's not in the CIP, so that's not involved in the impact fee review.
Just in response to Mr. Van Buren, the way I understood it from the description earlier, and I may have misunderstood it, but I believe it's part of the state statute that allows impact fees. It states that these adjustments can be requested and need to be granted. So it's not something that we are necessarily putting into our ordinance. It's just part of the state code. But Brian, I don't know if you can speak to that, but that was what I understood.
Well, to the degree that we're talking about the adjustments, that not only is it part of the state statute, but it's actually already part of our city code. That where someone is claiming, if I'm addressing the right subject, where someone was claiming that they are in a different circumstance than the circumstances that the fee structure and fee methodology was designed to address, then they can apply for an adjustment under our city code already.
And I think historically that's been the exception rather than the rule. Usually people pay the impact fees that are due, and an exception because of that is, I think, somewhat rare. Yeah. So I think what Dave is saying and what Kay's saying are both true. If we pass the impact fees, they're going to be generally assessed at the rate we pass them. There will be, I'm sure, some exceptions, but at least my understanding and my experience has been that it's not very often.
George? Maybe just to go back to the earlier discussion about affordable housing, I think the anxiety that Mr. Van Buren expressed is precisely why I think we need to, at least with the case of affordable housing, is specify what exactly are the criteria, and then that's not a vague thing that makes us vulnerable to looking like we're arbitrary judges, but we're following a set of guidelines. And if we're not satisfied with those guidelines, then we tweak them or we throw them out. But that was all I thought we had decided on earlier today.
Yeah. Cliff? To a couple of points. So to the latter point, that's correct, is the rather than a blanket exemption that's allowed if the council puts it in the ordinance to exempt for certain projects, the council's direction today was to go back and look at the possible exemption for affordable housing and to find parameters and how that would work if it were to be in place. It is currently not in place in the existing ordinance. It's not in the place in the proposed ordinance. So if the committee cannot come back and with a policy that's that the council can support, the status quo remains. We will not provide an exemption. So passing it tonight makes no difference to that. On the question of number of fixtures and things, what we heard from the consultants from Zions Bank was that it's rare for that number to be reduced because of the number of fixtures and things. Generally what happens is when they developers start looking at it, they realize they're better off to take the number that's there. And so it may happen on occasion, but it's not. It's more the exception than the rule.
Okay, any other discussion at this point? We have an implied motion with those two changes corrected from the work session today. Is that correct?
I believe there was only one change to the effective date.
The effective date, and was there not a statement of?
If you're talking about the motion about the examination of the issue.
Yes, that's not part of the ordinance.
That's not part of the ordinance.
It was just an ordinance, a separate task. So the only thing that was changed from the work session today is the effective date, which is now in the implied motion. Any discussion on that, Mr. Van Buren?
Just I want to question what Cliff just mentioned. So we pass the ordinance, And then there's a committee that will study how to give an exception for affordable housing.
Yeah, the direction was to send that to the Housing Committee and let them look at the issue and whether or not there was going to be a recommendation, and let them make a recommendation about whether to go forward and how that would look, and to bring that back to the council. And we've already put it on our calendar to bring back by the end of March if we can get through it that fast. But to come back with, so if the council wants to provide an exception for affordable housing, it would help you define what that looks like and the parameters around it, because there truly is still a cost to waiving impact fees for those items. The only difference is that the state code requires, if you provide an exemption for affordable housing, a state project, school project, or some other public purpose, 3 of those items, you have to actually come up with a funding source. You do not have to come up with a funding source for affordable housing, but in reality, the subsidy provided by existing residents will kind of make up that gap over time.
But none of that right now is part of the ordinance.
It is not. It's not in the existing law right now. It's not in the proposed law. The direction today was to send it to the Housing Committee and ask them to look at it and come back to council with some guidelines for you to consider.
And if they come back with guidelines that are favorable or unfavorable, we change the ordinance we're voting on tonight?
Well, yes and no. From a technical perspective, I would say that if the committee comes back and recommends creating an exemption for affordable housing to the council, the amendment that would be made would not actually be to the ordinance that's being voted on tonight. It would be to add additional language to Title 15, Chapter 8 of the code, creating a process for someone to apply for and receive such an exemption, but it actually wouldn't change any of the text that's being voted on tonight. It'd be putting another section into the impact fee chapter, but it wouldn't affect anything in this exhibit.
Thank you.
Any other discussion then? Okay, then we will call for a vote on the implied motion. Those in favor? Those opposed? In favor was Mr. Connect, Mr. Handley, Mr. Harding, Mr. Winterton, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Sewell. Opposed was Mr. Van Buren. Thank
Mr.
you
Chair?
very much. Yes.
This committee, I'd like to just recognize the members of this committee that worked for the last 15 years in putting this proposal together.
15 years?
15 months. Well, it's been 15 years, but felt like 15 years. For the last 15 months, on the committee have been Gary Winterton, Kay Van Buren from the council, and then from members of industry, Deanne Hewish, Chris Gambroulas, Monty Kingston, and Paul Smith, and then staff members, Dave Decker, Gary McGinn, Travis Ball, Doug Robbins, Camille Williams, Wayne Parker, John Borgett, and Bryce Mumford, and of course Science Public Finance, a whole bunch of other consultants that participated. So this was a big effort over a long time, and I think on behalf of council and the city staff, thank you to everybody that participated on this process.
Thank you, Cliff. And Kay chaired that committee, so Kay, thank you. We'll move on now to item number 10, an ordinance enacting Provo City Code, Chapter 14.50, Spring Creek High Occupancy Performance Redevelopment Option Zone. And we will also bring in item number 11 with this one, an ordinance amending the zone map classification of approximately 6.21 acres of real property generally located at 1606 South State Street from one family residential to a pro zone. And Javin Weaver will present.
Okay. The ordinance text amendment and the rezone came about by the applicant who brought in a 62-unit townhome project being built at this site at 1606 South State Street. The site is currently zoned R110, and the Southeast Master Plan, or Southeast Neighborhood Plan, excuse me, identifies this area as MDR with a batching overlay as We worked with the applicant on creating a type of use that would work in this area. They elected to draft a pro zone, which would better suit this area than the MDR with the batching overlay. Showing the location of the project right here. South State, you have showing the concept plan for this. And to answer your question, Dave, the dashed lines on this bottom left, that is for temporary access road going down towards 1640 South State. I'm sorry, 1640 South Road. So the primary differences with this project, with this zone, is the occupancy. It allows for 1 family or 4 singles per unit. The parking is 4.25 parking stalls per unit. So each unit would have 2 parking stalls in a garage and 2 parking stalls on the surface lot, plus the additional 0.25 on the parking lot. The height is similar to what would be in the MDR zone. Each unit does have 4 bathrooms and 4 bedrooms. The applicant met with various focus groups in creating the layout of this project, and they feel like this type of a layout and zone hits the market for this area. Staff hopes that this pro zone is duplicated in other projects along the South State Street corridor. I've not had any comments from any citizens calling me regarding the project. I have heard from the neighborhood chair, and I heard positive comments concerning it and praised the project and is excited for the new growth along this area in the city. And the applicant's here if you have any questions for them too.
Thank you, Jevon. We'd like to invite the applicant to come up if he would like to, and wait for the neighborhood chair, Mary. We'll have you in a second.
My name is Heath Johnston, and I represent the development. So what we've tried to do here is, it's been a little unique because as we met in focus groups, we basically went to what is our customer, which is young single professionals, and asked them what they want. It completely changed the design of what we're doing. We've been working with staff over a year. I could tell you story after story, but the first one is usually when I do a focus group, I buy them food. I get them in a room and I ask questions from when they order to when their food comes as fast as I can. The 2 times we did this, it went over 2 hours, pages and pages of notes, and they basically put this together. I won't say it's perfect, I can't make everybody happy, but it's designed with a lot of parking, which we all know that that's an issue. It has 1 bedroom that is large with their own private bathroom, and there's actually 4.5 bathrooms for guests. On the rooftop, we have flex space and even a little fire pit for them to congregate and be around. So we're very excited about the project. We feel we're probably the first step in this area of redeveloping it. So we're a little nervous about that. But obviously we feel good in that we can hit the price point that they need to keep it economical. And hopefully this will greatly help them and Provo with this increased population of young professionals.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much. We'll now invite Mary to come up as the neighborhood chair.
It has been a very long process. We began this, like you said, over a year ago. In February, this went before not only our neighborhood, but individuals, residents of Provo South as well. It was very well received. We're looking forward to this. It's going to be a good thing. It's going to be a good thing. I don't know what else we can say about that. It definitely aligns with the Southeast Area Plan and the general plan. So let's do this.
Thank you. We will now open this item up for public comment, if anyone wishes to comment on this. Seeing no comments, we will bring it back to council. And this item was heard on the Planning Commission on November 28th. It's the first hearing for this item with the council. Along with that's item number 10 and 11. If there's any council members that would like to ask for a continuance on this at this time, would be the appropriate time to ask for that. Okay, seeing no council member coming forward, we'll bring it back for discussion in a motion. Dave?
I just wanted to say I really appreciated the developers' extra effort here with the focus groups and really trying to find out what would meet the needs of this important and growing demographic. I'm excited. Thank you.
Mr. Jones, we have two items. Do we vote on them separately?
Yes, despite the fact that they're related, I would vote separately because the first one actually enacts a section of the code that creates a zone that the second one applies. So if we can create the zone first, I think that works better.
Okay, we'll go with item number 10 to start with then, the implied motion of creating the zone. Creating the, what are we creating, the zone or the code? Yeah, the zone. Okay, we'll create the zone and ask for a vote on item number 10. Those in favor? That passes unanimously. We'll now move to item number 11 and ask for a vote on the implied motion for the ordinance amending the
zone map to apply the zone that you just
amending the zone map to apply the zone which we just approved. Those in favor? That also passes unanimously.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Mr. Harding.
I'm just a little bit amazed. We just created a new zone, applied a higher density zone, and we didn't hear one complaint. I mean, that's that's remarkable, and I think that's a testament to this years-long process that we went through to create the Southeast Area Master Plan, to work with the target demographic, the neighbors, and all of that. This really is remarkable, and I think this is the right way to do it. And thanks to staff, thanks to neighborhood chairs, thanks to the members of those focus groups, thanks to everyone that had a hand in it. This is really, I mean, the silence from the community is deafening, absolutely. And then one last final thought. I believe this is Mr. Weaver. Mr. Weaver, I believe this is his first presentation to the council. I just want to tell him very good job. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move on to item number 12, a resolution approving the adoption of the moderate income housing report for Provo City. Brian Maxfield will present this.
Thank you. As we discussed at the work session, the state has a couple of housing requirements in state code that the cities must follow. One of those is that the city have a moderate housing element to the general plan. And the second is that the city have a biennial report of the progress made in accomplishing the goals from that plan. What you have before you tonight is acceptance of that report and moving that forward so that we can develop that and get that into the state and meet that requirement by December 31st. At the meeting I'm sorry. Did a little background on what the requirements from the state were, and then also I think specifically what I wanted to bring out were the findings from the report so that we can, that's okay, well. And reading the report, you can see there are several things we still need to work on, several things we need to accomplish. And one of those is updating our housing element in the general plan and even changing that to meet some newer state requirements that were enacted last year, as well as likely making changes that could occur from this next legislative session where there are some proposals that we anticipate changes being made to the requirements. One of those is that you may have this report each year, for the city. So again, the report is just to measure the progress. The plan itself needs to really come in and establish what we're trying to do for the goals and objectives. And I think one of the elements we talked about with the Planning Commission is coming up with some more specific goals. The state suggests that you narrow that down to maybe 5 or so and really have them so that they could be measurable goals. You would have a responsibility and a way to measure those so that when you report on it, are we achieving that or not, or do we need to change some directions? The other items with the element we noted were our establishing a strong basic demographic numbers. We've got that we get from the census, we get from American Community Surveys, but we don't really have it in a form that we can call it up and really point to a map and say, here are the strong areas, here are weak areas, here are things we can do. And we really want to get something established that way, or something we can easily update so we have those numbers readily available. And then also, as we create the report, is really to look at some of the specific demographics the city has. One we mentioned in the work meeting was the BYU or university student demographic that makes up such a large number in the city and really can affect how we look at the need for meeting the needs of the lower income people. Usually students, you don't count in that because they have other sources of income. They're there more by choice. They're not in a situation. They can have a lot more flexibility. And I think the fear is that it distorts us so you're not really directing your efforts where they specifically need to go. And so I think that would be another emphasis in that plan, to see if we can't pull out a little bit more of an understanding of the effect the student population has on those numbers. And we don't have, well, are there any questions on the findings? Basically what we showed is that income is not keeping pace with costs, which is pretty well statewide. The major demographic is still the major gap we have in reaching that demographic is the income level that's 30% or less of the median income. That's extremely low income level. That's also consistent with the state. That's the most common one that everybody has. We have made progress in a lot of areas. We've closed some areas, and again, in saying that, it sounds like I said one thing and another, but there are ways to measure affordable housing and ways to measure moderate income housing. The ones measure on a basis of what the median home price is for the city. The other's based on what your income's able to afford, so that you don't pay more than 30% of your income for housing costs, which includes mortgage or rent or utilities and all those things added together anyway. We're not going to have that.
I just had one question. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if are we doing questions now, or are you still waiting for the table? I don't know. This is a very
yeah, if you had.
It's just a very specific question, but I was reading the report, which I thought was very interesting and very helpful. And there was one statement that I just didn't understand. It said, if the number of new moderate income housing units is above 40% of the total number of units being built, the percentage of moderate income housing should be increasing. Do you know what that meant? If it's above 40%, it should keep going above 40%? I just didn't understand. I thought maybe there was a typo or something, or?
I apologize because I haven't looked at that for a while, but I think it has to be based on the if you take 80% of the median, you're really talking about 40% of the housing.
Okay.
And that's where I'm thinking it must be referring to.
So it has to, if it's above 40%, it should be increasing. That seemed.
Yeah, when I read that, it took me a while to think about it, and I think he nailed it. So we're talking about median. So the median is 50% above, 50% below, and since not affordable,
And we're at 80% of the median.
Moderate income is, in this report, is considered everything below 80% of the median. That would cover roughly, not exactly, but roughly 40% of the population. So if more than 40% of the housing is affordable to that group, then the percentage of moderate income housing should be increasing because it's targeted to that 40%.
Does that make a little bit more sense?
I think that makes more sense. Thanks to the engineer for explaining it to me.
Well, the biggest thing you have to remember, these are ratios. You'll never be able to eliminate moderate income housing because it's a ratio of the whole housing picture. So, the idea is you're addressing it. You're trying to make units available that are affordable for that moderate level and even the next level. So we're talking about 80%, but then you also have the 50% and the 30% that we just mentioned was extremely low. So you're really targeting that. One of the other targeting areas you have are special needs populations. So it's not just income. It's based on other things too. The people who you would assume or found through studies, they have a little bit harder time getting into housing. Veterans, for instance, is a key one. And so being able to target those groups, being able to really find housing for them regardless of income levels. It's, you take pieces and use them, but you really can't just focus on one element. You really need to look at the whole aspect of people needing housing.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Maxfield? We will open this up to, stay close, Brian, we might need your help, to public comment. Anyone interested in commenting on this item, would you please come forward now? Seeing none, we will bring it back to council and recognize that this is the first hearing on this item. Should any council member desire to consider this item again at the next council meeting, would you please make that known right now? Okay, seeing no action there, we will ask for any further discussion. We have an implied motion on the table, so we will now call for an implied motion on this resolution. I mean, a vote on this resolution. Those in favor? That passes unanimously. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we want to apologize. We had a computer problem. It's frozen again like it did last time, so we're trying to get it rebooted and reworked. So,
Are we able to move on, do you think, without the computer?
Yeah, I wouldn't wait.
Mr. Chair, if I could address that, first off, I'll disclose I've got a little bit of a conflict of interest here because I work so closely with the Energy Department. But we've got 2 items remaining, and our item with our Energy Department Director is scheduled to go last. But I'm anticipating, based on earlier discussion, that it won't actually involve any comment, whereas the land use item has, at least in the past, required a fair amount of discussion. I'm just wondering if it might be appropriate to flip those 2.
Item number 13 and 14.
Right, and do 14 first.
Okay, let's do that.
If that meets the council's approval.
Is that okay? If anyone has any objection? If not, we will go to item number 14. An ordinance amending Provo City Code to clarify requirements regarding customers that generate electricity. This has citywide impact, and Travis Ball. Thank you for being here tonight, Travis.
Thank you, Council Chair, Council, Mayor, and Brian especially tonight. I appreciate that more than you can know. So this is some language that we are proposing for code number 12.03.08 that has to do with generation of energy by those that are other than Provo City. And there's some language that clarifies what happens when somebody does generate without a license, and also it clarifies what we need to do for qualified facilities. And we've gone through that language. If there's any questions, I'll be willing to answer that. If not, we propose that the language changes by Brian be accepted, approved.
No questions, Travis. You do good. Thank you. This item is open for public comment. Is there anyone that wishes to comment to this? Okay, we'll bring it back to council. Any further discussion for the council at this point? We have Mr. Harding.
Mr. Jones, if you could just briefly go over what provisions can be modified by written agreement. I thought I was on top of it, and then there was just some changes there, and I haven't had a chance to really think through that. But if you could just kind of describe what could be changed by that written agreement, because this if it passes, this now leaves the hands of the council. We won't see these anymore. It's under the prerogative of the administration to enter into those agreements.
Sure. So there's two parts of the ordinance that could be potentially modified by written agreement. One is that under section 12.03.090, any time that someone who is under federal law comes to the city and is what's called a qualifying facility under federal law, anytime that exceptions to the requirements would be required under PURPA, then the city could execute a written agreement to make exceptions to our current ordinance in order to comply with that federal law. In addition to that, even if it wasn't required by federal law, although the intent here really is just to do it under those circumstances, but there could also be an agreement entered into that makes exceptions to the following provisions. The provisions applicable only to customers generating more than 25 kW, which can only be industrial and commercial account holders. Specifically, the provisions that those customers must enter into an agreement, a power purchase agreement to sell all electric energy to UMPA. That termination of the agreement with UMPA would be grounds to revoke their license, and that such licensees would be charged for all energy consumed and not receive any rate and bill credits from Provo City because they would instead be selling their power to UMPA. Those are the specific provisions that could be altered by written agreement.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, we have the implied motion for this ordinance. We will call for a vote on that motion. Those in favor? Thank you. That passes unanimously. We'll now return back to, Brian, thank you for all the effort on this. And Travis, this is very important to our city, and we're grateful for all the effort that has gone into this. And Mr. Parker, if you're listening, thank you too. We'll go to item 13, an ordinance amending Provo City Code to increase buffering requirements and transition standards with certain uses, when certain uses are adjacent to a residential zone. And Dustin Wright will present this.
Thank you. So this item we heard at the last City Council meeting, and based on the discussion we had there, staff was asked to go back and address a few of the items that were being discussed and to work with Councilman Connect on that as well. And so we've gone back and done that and submitted a revised ordinance amendment with a few changes that I can go over that are highlighted. The first being that we added for the fencing materials that would be used around these yards would be to bring chain link back how it originally was or is currently in the code. The reasoning behind that was just because that would be in industrial manufacturing type areas. It wouldn't be in the areas where masonry walls would be required against the residential properties. So we felt like that there might have been some confusion there that the chain link would have been allowed or something by the residential. The second change would be where a masonry wall is required along the residential, it'd be along all sides that are facing the residential zone and within 100 feet of the residential zone. The intent there, I think, was to, if there's if you're within 100 feet of that residential zone, you would have that requirement for the masonry wall to help mitigate any impact there. The other was, after looking at some of the areas where these are, we looked at the city has design corridors throughout the city, and we thought it would be a good idea to include those, to also have that masonry wall requirement if they're adjacent to, let's see, the design corridor that are listed in Provo City Code 1434-290. So we added that section there, and that the gates that would be on these yards would match those materials that are required. Other than on a masonry wall where you wouldn't have a masonry gate, you'd use the materials that we've listed there: wood, metal, composite fence material. And then the last change that we highlighted here is when they are located along a design corridor, that they'd have an additional setback on the front property line that's visible from the design corridor. So that'd be a 20-foot landscape setback that would be required between the yard and the design corridor. So we've added that. Everything else we've kept the same. So if there's any additional questions or clarifications.
So I think that 20-foot setback was basically from the property line?
Correct, yeah, the property line facing the street, the front property line.
And so as you drove down the design corridor, you would have new buildings or impound yards or whatever set back 20 feet.
Correct, yeah. So the yard couldn't be closer to the street than buildings and other things that we see along these design corridors that are pushed back. So that was...
So we would have the landscape buffer and look of a design corridor.
Correct. And then have the masonry wall as well.
Right, and the masonry wall would not just be what is facing the design corridor, but if you drive down the design corridor and can see 2 or 3 of the walls, whichever walls you can actually see would have to be the masonry rather than the other materials.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Wright? We'll stay close and we will open this item to for public comment. Anyone interested in commenting on this?
Reading that, and I thought you're still on that one, but you're not. My name is Leo Lines. I think pretty much everybody here knows me. I'm not a tower. I don't own a tow company. Why I'm helping with this issue, I don't know. But 5 years later, this is where we're at. Brian's smiling because he's on a committee with me on the state level. This issue came about because a tow yard went in where it was allowed. It was zoned for parking cars, and he found the spot. The lady rented to him. But then we found out that you've got 2 parts in the code. One says you can have it, and the other says, but you have to have some conditional uses. They weren't in the same areas, and so this person read the code, said it's allowed, did his yard. One of the differences is these towers, they can't set their rates. if, Chairman Winterton, if the city made you have some huge costs on your offices over there, you'd raise your rent. Okay, when you require these guys to put in a concrete wall, okay, what's a concrete wall of a foot now? 55, 80 bucks a foot? Anyway, that's a lot more than chain link. They can't raise their costs of towing to cover that. They're not allowed. It's illegal because the state sets their rates. Okay, now it's really hard to defend towers because nobody likes towers. They only like them when their car breaks down on the side of the road or when they've been in a wreck and they have to get their car towed. They don't like them the other way when they are parking somewhere they shouldn't and their car's been taken. The other, I don't know, can you guys bring up the thing, the site plan? Oh yeah, can he bring up the site plan real quick?
If you can get it on the computer, that'd be great.
There it is. Okay, is this a pointer? And which button do you push? There it goes. There we go. This right here is Turley's property. This is Carpenter Seed, which I'm sad to hear is going out of business. This owner and this owner are the same people. These cars right there, see that car right there? Well, you can't see it. That's my car. My daughter wrecked that in 1999. It's been sitting there ever since. That has been there for 20 years. Those cars, junk cars, dismantled, half taken apart. And now this changes. Of course, it looks really nice right now, but for a long time, that was just garbage. Well, Mr. Turley never said, hey, look at this. This is a mess. I can't build apartments, residential stuff here. He never complained. And this was this way before he bought the property. Not once. But then when Mr. Habel rents this and puts in a tow yard, a legal state tax tow yard, he goes berserk, starts, puts in a text amendment and wants it now gone. Mr. Turley also used this zone to get a huge increase in the density here for his apartments. So he wants his cake and eat it too. Well, that's not fair. It's not fair to Mrs. Sweldo, who owns this. She relies on this income to make ends meet. She's not a single mother, but her husband's in Bolivia and can't return back to the United States. And so he used this zone to get his density. Now he's dissing the zone, but never once said anything about these cars. And the tow yard does not look at all like this. The tow yard, the cars come and go. There was a comment that there'd be cars coming and going all night long. When you're on rotation, and you can ask your chief of police or whoever does the rotation, each company maybe gets one call a week. And if they have 5 companies, that's 5 in a week if they get it. So there's not that much. The other thing is, you guys need this. When there's a wreck on your streets, where are the cars going to go? They got to go somewhere, and they got to go to tow yards. And then when somebody gets towed from BYU, you guys are zoning these things across Geneva Road into the heavy industrial. Now that student has to go all the way out at 1 in the morning into a seedy part of town to try to recover their car. So they're not noisy. There's not a lot of traffic. The state has parameters already. I'm not sure, Brian and I disagree on this. You guys are a political subdivision. The state has already set rules for these things. It's in the code. It's admin rules. He meets those requirements. Now, hopefully, Brian and I, in the next few weeks, there's a bill being run, and we can get some of those upgraded. But the goal is to have every yard be the same statewide. So they're secure, they have the same requirements. Because when your car gets towed, you don't want somebody jumping in there and stealing parts or stealing things out of it. You want it secure. Right now in the state code, it's not that way. They say you just have to bring it to a safe place. Well, what's a safe place? Okay, let's see. Now, when we ask zoning about other tow yards that were next to residential, there was never any problems, never any complaints. And so this issue, I don't understand why he didn't jump all over this years ago, never said boo about this, but then when a legal tow yard goes in, now it's all a problem.
Leo, I've been asleep. Your timer's expired. Do you want to? I'll give you a second to wrap up here.
The other thing is, the underlying thing that you guys, maybe you know, maybe you don't, that Mr. Habel, who has this lot, and Mr. Turley are at each other's throat over legal issues and have been for like 3 years now. And it's more of a vendetta than a policy. And so I would suggest you delay this until after we can get something done on the state level that will hopefully fix some of these problems and have some continuity and then readdress that. Because having a concrete wall as opposed to a chain link fence is not going to change anything. The people on that third floor are going to look over anything you put up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
I think maybe the thing that hasn't been mentioned is the fact that this came about to get rid of the disparity between the two zones or the two codes that were there where one said yes and the other one said no. So I just want to make sure that everyone here agrees with that. Am I correct in my understanding? It was to take the ambiguity out of it, wasn't it?
The request originally from Mr. Turley was to have a 200-foot buffer or distance between these yards. And staff noticed as they looked into things that there was the ambiguity. And so it has kind of snowballed and covers several different things. So staff has an interest, Mr. Turley has an interest, and frankly, the property owner to the south, Ryan Taylor, was also very motivated and took the picture from his roof that we were able to see previously when we looked at the property.
And could I ask a question of Dustin? I brought up the state things on this, and the gentleman who spoke prior to me also brought those up. This doesn't apply here, does it, or does it? Do I ask you or you?
Rephrase your question for me.
Okay, before this even came before the Planning Commission, I researched as far as what were the state laws governing impound yards, tow yards, those kinds of things. And I understood that there were very specific criteria that needed to be met. It needed to be on a solid surface, concrete or blacktop. And then it went on with a number of other things. That was the one thing that stood out to me. I brought it to Dustin's attention, and I believe when we were in front of the Planning Commission, when we were in front of the council here, he clarified what that state law really meant. It was basically governing only those entities that have a contract with, am I correct? The state, yeah. So if that's a state-owned tow yard.
Well, not state-owned. But,
state-governed, shall we say.
Right.
So where does this fit in all of that?
I don't know what the status of that tow yard is with regard to whether it's a state impound yard or not.
Okay. Well, I can tell you from my own visual inspection, and my husband's, and we took pictures too, that it does not comply with the state requirements. You're supposed to have enough room between cars to open the car door completely and not hit another vehicle sitting by it. They were just in there, and I'm sure you guys saw it. If you got the one from Ryan Taylor, it's there. So I still believe that this is something we need to take care of. And just because which one of us wants that next to our home? And we are the southeast gateway to the city. That's the most important thing we need to remember in this particular instance. I am not familiar with or am not aware of any other tow yards personally that may be impacted by this, but I suspect that all of you are, because
Thank
this
you,
is
Mary.
the second time it's come before you.
Thank you.
Vicky Connect, Provo South neighborhood. I have opposed this from the beginning simply because we're trying to better State Street and not make it a dumping ground for tow yards and for junk cars. I would love to see that cleaned up on that one business, and he has cleaned it up some from this picture, I believe. But it's just something I don't think belongs on a design corridor. It needs to be somewhere near the rail yard or somewhere else where they don't have to worry about a concrete wall, and where they can put it in and it doesn't matter. But here on a design corridor, it does matter.
Any other comment? Okay, we will bring this back to council then for any discussion. Dave?
I had a couple of questions for Mr. Jones. First, could you describe the nature of the discrepancy between the two sections of code? I was a little confused about that. That's the first question. And then the second is if you have any observations on this issue based on your participation in the committee. And I guess there's a third one is what do you think of the suggestion to delay this until the result of the committee is completed?
I'm probably going to have to defer to Dustin on with regard to the first question, because I wasn't really involved in those conversations. My basic understanding, and I invite Dustin to correct me if I'm wrong, is that the discrepancy that was discovered is that there were conflicting places in the code where tow and impound yards were allowed as a permitted use, and also in other places required to have a conditional use permit, even though those sections purportedly applied to the same zones. Is that right? And so those requirements were in conflict. With regard to other observations, I guess I would say, and Leo won't be surprised by this, but he and I have very different goals with regard to the uniformity of with what any state legislation would do with regard to uniformity of towing requirements. Without hopefully putting words in his mouth, I think Leo would agree that his goal is to establish uniform requirements at the state level that would apply and would be the only requirements that apply. As a representative of the league's goals are to cooperate in establishing minimum uniform requirements that would set minimum boundaries, but that would not limit a city's ability to impose additional requirements. And so in this case, I don't think that there's any current statute that limits the city's ability to enforce and enact zoning provisions regarding permitted and conditional uses within a zone and the requirements that are necessary in order for those uses to be permitted. And some in the towing industry may have a target at accomplishing that, but that's something that I wouldn't support now or in my role on the committee as a representative of ULCT. And so I don't think that really has any bearing on the question before you, in my opinion, as to whether or not you think as a policy matter these are the appropriate requirements for zoning requirements within the city.
Brian, probably go back to you again. The current tow yard that we're talking about, that everyone's referring to, according to Mr. Lyons, he applied and got a permit and he's totally in compliance? and I'll follow up and you answer both. If he is, then if we pass this ordinance, is it going to have any effect on that particular yard? Or will it be yards in the future?
Well, I would say my understanding of the situation is different, and I haven't, again, the planners, maybe Bill wants to weigh in on this, but my understanding was that before the application was submitted, Mr. Turley came in and submitted his application for an ordinance change, and so the pending legislation rule is in effect, which means that the application for this tow yard is subject to any changes that are passed as a result of that pending legislation.
That's correct. After the pending legislation was submitted, the tow yard operator submitted an application for conditional use permit. We've been holding that, just holding on to it, waiting for this to be resolved. If this is resolved and they become permitted uses, they won't need to pursue the conditional use. If this is just stayed, if you just stay action on this while the state does their thing, the pending legislation will expire in mid-January, and we would proceed with the conditional use permit on the property to the north, the one that's been pointed out.
Bill, can you just remind us when that 6-month period, it's January
23rd, I believe.
23rd, okay.
25th.
25th.
Mr. Connect.
So there's several factors at play here. One, the proximity to residential. There's no move here to say that it's not appropriate in the zone. The zone seems to be a suitable place if it's not immediately next door to a residential. And it's not that we're going to exclude that, it's just that we're going to say there is a condition that you have to have a certain buffer and a masonry wall if you are right up next to residential to kind of buffer the impact. The other thing that came into play was the presence of the design corridor, which is called out explicitly in the recent changes so that it's very clear, and you don't have to go look it up in some other part of the code, that if you're going to do this on a design corridor, which is not every arterial or collector or any, there's only a few design corridors, and we want to have them look a certain way. And so those setbacks and the fact that you would need a masonry fence are called out specifically. Dustin, do you want to, if we can bring the picture down State Street a little bit and show that auto body shop that's just a little bit to the, yes, right about there on that intersection. And if you could, we talked about this and how this is kind of a I don't know, a role model of how an example. I don't know if Bill or if Dustin or you would like to.
Yeah, so at this site, you can see, maybe faintly if we could zoom in a little bit on it, you might see a little bit better the fencing on this property here.
Oops.
So fencing around areas of the vehicles that are being utilized, I guess in this case, for the auto body shop, fencing along this area here. So the area out front is just a parking lot for employees or patrons of the site would park out there like you'd see on any other commercial parking lot. But the vehicles that are being worked on are located behind the type of fence, and I'm not exactly sure what type of fence this is, but
it's masonry.
Masonry there. And so I think that's kind of what we'd be hoping to see moving forward with an impound yard, is that there'd be a setback, since this is on a design corridor, there'd be a setback before the yard could start. It would have the masonry wall because it's adjacent to the design corridor. And so that would help screen and buffer and make sure that the intent of the design corridor, which is to beautify and enhance the corridor there for those utilizing it, and keep the type of use that wouldn't look as good up close to the street. So I think that's kind of what we talked about when we looked at that as an example. So setbacks, screening, things like that are what we're looking for to help mitigate any of these potential concerns with the impound yards.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, this item was heard on the Planning Commission on November 14th. This is a second hearing so we will be having an opportunity to vote on an implied motion.
I would probably clarify one thing about that, just so that we don't have any confusion later on a technical standpoint. That typically speaking, the implied motion applies to the version that comes to us from the Planning Commission. Mr. Connect, in cooperation with planning staff, has come up with an alternative, but I don't know that there's ever been an expression by the council that the council as a body wants to substitute that proposed change in for the Planning Commission, the version that the Planning Commission reviewed. So I think for safety's sake, if that is the council's intent, that we ought to do by motion change the document that the implied motion applies to be the version that Mr. Connect has presented, if that's what the council wants.
Dave?
And could we either display or summarize the differences between the two?
In other words, bring up the document.
Do we have a red line version of that?
I believe there's a version where the changes have been highlighted. Bryce, can you bring up that exhibit? If I'm reading this right, I believe that all of the areas that are highlighted are the places where it's been changed from what you saw in the last council meeting.
So one of the changes was we added back chain link with beauty link, because if you're already going to say that you need a masonry wall in the areas and proximities that we are concerned with, then we shouldn't be worried about using the chain link and beauty link in other areas where it doesn't matter.
Can I ask what beauty link is?
It's the slats, and you can buy it where it is from the factory in between the slats. It's actually a better product than if you put the slats in afterwards.
When the council's done looking at this, these changes right here, Bryce, you can scroll down. There's one more change down in subsection 8, where a provision has been added about the setback required along the design corridor.
On this 20-foot setback, I'm still taking a look at the collision repair. Is that 20-foot setback just for the impound yard and administrative buildings could be closer, or does that setback apply to both the yard and buildings?
So this would apply to the yard. So not all of the impound yards are going to have an office. I think maybe most do. And so the office could meet whatever the zoning requires for the structure, and the design corridor has some guidelines there, but this would be for the actual yard area.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay. We have an implied motion.
Actually, do I need to make the motion because you brought up the point that it shouldn't be
Yeah, so
implied?
maybe we should, that's a good idea.
Yes, if
Let's
someone
make that
wants to make a motion to substitute this version, then now would be the time to do that.
So moved.
Okay.
There's a second. Okay. We'll go with Kay Van Buren on that one.
And just so we're clear, you know, we do have as standing policy that not to approve substitutions in one step. So this motion, all it does is it substitutes this version as the official version. Then you'll have another vote on the implied motion to approve the newly substituted version.
Thank you. So we will, go ahead.
Just one more clarification. When we discussed this last time, we talked about different setbacks for the, have we handled that now with just the fence setback? Is that how that has been handled? Or do we still have setbacks from any residential?
If we can go back up a little bit higher on to the previous section of the code, or yeah. And so it says a masonry wall shall be required along all sides facing and that are within 100 feet of a residential zone. So if you're farther away than 100 feet, this does not apply. And it also, we didn't change it. It was recommended from the Planning Commission to have that 30-foot distance between the residential use and the impound yard. So that hasn't changed. And the masonry wall, originally just said a masonry wall shall be required, but it wasn't very specific. And so we added all sides that are actually facing a residential zone.
Yeah, Bryce, if you can scroll down to subsection 3, that's where that 30-foot setback that was in the previous version was at, and that's still in this version.
So it can be 30 feet, but it'll have to be a masonry wall, and it has to be even more than, the masonry wall has to be there if it's even closer, I mean, further away than that. I mean, that's gonna.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions on this version that we will use as the implied motion if we pass this? Okay, those in favor of substituting this one as the implied motion, would you please indicate? That passes unanimously. Now, we do have an implied motion as it's written on the screen here. And any discussion on that implied motion? We'll call for a vote then. Those in favor? Again, that passes unanimously. And with that item of business being taken care of, we will adjourn by common consent. Thank you for being here tonight. Not as bad. We spent.
Before 9 o'clock, Mayor. That's great. So I have to be back here 6:30.
All the new